Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. This is your host, Howard Fox. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration of the great outdoors. Our guest today is Jim Boone. Jim is an outdoor enthusiast and ecologist. His professional interests include looking at the way things interact, focusing on local effects of climate change on the desert ecosystem, and things that can be done to ease the transition to a different climate system. Jim, welcome to the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks for having me, Howard. It's an honor to be here with you.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, I had the opportunity to meet Jim in person at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, which was held back in October out near Red Rock Conservation Area. And Jim, I think if I recall, you had a table and I was just kind of roaming around waiting for the festival to start. And you and I struck up a conversation.
Yeah, that's right. It was a nice chance to get to meet you there.
Yeah, great event. And was this your first time at the at this kind of event, or do you frequent events like this?
Yeah, my wife and I have been frequenting events like that. Pretty much anytime we get a chance, we take our abandoned mining cleaning marker display out and talk to the public and try to raise awareness about the problem.
Well, and I truly appreciate that. And for our listeners, and I kind of joke about this, as I was walking around, everybody has their clipboard and signing people up on their list, get your name and email address. And I get that, but I get a lot of those. And so I was like, when I, saw you and I saw I was curious about the marker, the clay marker, and I didn't just want to be on anybody's list. That's why I asked you about coming on the podcast, which was kind of my goal. So, and here we are. This is great. So would you mind, Jim, just provide a little background about the work that you've been doing and your interest in the great outdoors? You're here in Las Vegas. I think you're only my second Las Vegas guest. So this is great. I feel like it's nice to finally meet some locals, but you're an outdoor enthusiast and you're also an ecologist, and share a little bit more about how this kind of work and interest evolved for you.
Yeah, well, I have a long history of spending time in the outdoors. My parents took me camping while my mother was still pregnant, and so I got to spend Death Valley out enjoying the peace and quiet tucked in my mother's womb. So definitely got started early there. And then, we grew up in a sort of a lower middle class income family with 4 kids, and we couldn't afford to go to ski resorts or vacations to Cancun and stuff. So we always went camping. That was our way to vacation and getaways for the weekends. And so I grew up in Los Angeles Basin. And so our getaway places were the Sierra Nevada, the Mojave Desert, the Joshua Tree, Hunza Borrego, places like that. And really instilled an early and long lasting love for me in the desert. And we just sort of built from there. I went off to sort of build a career doing various things in biology. And now I'm retired and I'm still trying to find ways to do interesting and useful things in the world of biology.
Fantastic. And by the way, I mean, going camping and you're still in your mom's womb, that's the ultimate, I don't know, let's just call it, well, I was thinking car camping experience. That's the ultimate self-contained camping experience. You literally had to do nothing, just show up.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I love it. With your interest in biology, where did that take you, and how did it inform some of this work that you're doing now in helping educate and get people interested in, the public lands?
Yeah, well, that started pretty early too. When I graduated from high school, again in Los Angeles, it only took me 5 days after I turned 18 to get out of town and move out and live in the mountains. And I worked for the Forest Service up in Idaho for a couple of summers, doing various things, basically ranging around, cutting down trees and logging. I decided That's not exactly the world I wanted to be a part of. And ended up switching over to the National Park Service, which is more of a land conservation agency, and did various things there, including giving campfire talks at night and leading nature walks and sort of cut my teeth doing some of that kind of work. And, some other things helping to protect the landscape. And I still kept my fingers in firefighting, emergency medicine, and technical rock rescue and things. And, eventually we got off to college and got offered jobs in Georgia. And that turned into taking a whole big bucket full of lemons and making some sweet lemonade out of it. And I ended up with a PhD in ecology. And then, moved back to Nevada where I worked in the desert studying plants and animals and spent some time doing desert tortoise work on construction sites, sort of a environmental inspector. So sort of a different kind of biological work. And eventually, quit working altogether and now spend my time doing things like documenting the distribution of Joshua trees in the desert, which is something that ought to be well known and is not, and knocking down mining claim markers because they trap and kill birds.
Very interesting. I'd love to touch on both of those topics, and there's some other areas of I'm curious about as well because you grew up in the desert, and you and I don't know, maybe we're within about 10, 15 years age of each other. So well, I think that's probably safe to say. But I'm curious first, the types of changes that you're seeing today in the desert versus when you were that high school kid or that high school graduate off to your first job in Idaho. What is really the most pronounced changes that you have seen?
Well, everything is drying out is probably the most pronounced change. It's been drying out for a long time. And our small changes have been building up over the last couple of decades. So now all of a sudden, it feels like a tidal wave of dryness spilling over the desert now. So the things we notice are if you people did some studies back in like the 20s or 30s and then repeated them again about 10 years ago and found that over that time period that the number of birds in the Mojave Desert is down by, well, I should have looked this up beforehand. I think it's something like 70%. But so in the old days, when I went out bird eating as a kid, I might see, four birds. And now I go out and I see one. That's really a huge difference. And it's not, it's a little bit every year. So if you think about this year compared to last year, it doesn't seem like a difference. But if you look at this year compared to 30 years ago, that's a huge difference. We also see the spread of non-native grasses in the desert, which have the effect of carrying fire. So the desert is an ecosystem that's not really adapted to fire. We think of Smokey the Bear, and the common consensus is that forest fires are good, right? On benefit, they're good. The focus is on forest fires, not desert fires. So forest fires generally are good. Desert fires are generally bad. So what we see is every year there's more fires, more of the desert vegetation is burned away, the shrubs and Joshua trees and things like that. And they're just not really coming back, not in any kind of a time span that we can recognize. Also in our desert forest mountains, like up on Mount Charleston, we're seeing these horrendous fires that burn away the forest literally burn it away. There's almost nothing left after these fires. And in our lifetimes and maybe never, we're going to see the forest come back the way it was. Yeah, so there's a lot of changes. So I feel very fortunate to have started out in the desert exploring, in the 1970s and 80s when so many things were the way they had been for millennia. And now to see it the way it is now, it's distressing in some ways, but it's exhilarating too, as an ecologist, to see the things that are changing. Well, for instance, we have a lot of species that are moving up in an elevation where it's cooler and wetter, or moving north where it's cooler and wetter. And so you can go up on the northern edge of the Joshua Tree Range, for example, And, you can stand and look south towards, lower elevations and hotter temperatures and see a bunch of old Joshua trees. And then turn around and stand in the same exact spot. Turn around and look to the north up slopes of the mountains, and all you see are young Joshua trees. It does give some hope for the future.
Yeah, it's sobering. You had used this term of a tidal wave of change, and I know somebody said this once. I don't know who I should attribute it to, but a butterfly flaps its wings in Africa and then turns into a hurricane in, down in the Gulf. And even in the desert, I mean, these little butterfly has been flapping its wings many years ago. And now all of a sudden, this tidal wave of change is growing and growing. And we're living through it right now. But you also, what you've just shared, there is a little bit of hope because everything, not everything, but there's some species that they're going to be extinct. They just can't adapt, but there are going to be some adaptations of birds, mammals, the invertebrates, as well as even the fauna, the trees, like the Joshua trees. What can you share more about with this Joshua tree research you were alluding to before?
Well, I've been growing up in the Mojave Desert. I always have a fondness for Joshua trees, but until recently, nothing really specific. But recently botanists have decided that the Joshua trees are actually two different species. So we have these really tall, like 40-foot tall Joshua trees down in Joshua Tree National Park and over in the California deserts. These great big tall straight trunk things. And then, you look around here and we see these little shrubby Joshua trees that grow, 10 or 15 feet tall usually. And as they start branching near the bottom, they look more like a shrub. They decided these two are different species. And it turns out that the ones in California are actually having a really hard time on account of climate change, that it's getting too hot and dry. And so if you go down to the southern end of Joshua National Park, you find a big bunch of big, very old Joshua trees. And these could be hundreds of years old Joshua trees. But no young ones. There's no recruitment. There's no babies taking over. So when the old ones die, there won't be any. And so California decided to list their Joshua trees as potential endangered species under the California Endangered Species Act. And they did some research and some modeling, and they looked at the distribution of Joshua trees and thought, well, here's where they are now, and under various climate scenarios, where do we expect them to go in the future? And so I grabbed one of these maps, and it was all based on stuff out of California, but it was maps for up into southern Utah and places. And so I looked up at the north edge of the distribution, and I thought, well, where are they going to be in Gold Butte? Because I spent a lot of time out there. There's lots of Joshua trees. It's an area that I care particularly about. And lo and behold, their map showed that there are no Joshua trees there. And with climate change, there'll never even be any out there. And I said, well, that's an obvious flaw in the data. So I took it on myself to start exploring the distribution of Joshua trees and recording them. And we document them using a citizen science project called iNaturalist. And it's really cool. You can go out and just take a picture of it with your phone. It uploads to the internet, and it makes a scientific data point for people to use in the future, scientists to use in the future. So when they make the maps next time, they'll say, oh, yeah, there's Joshua trees in Gold Butte. And, how are they going to react to climate change? And so I got into spending a lot of time just wandering the desert, taking pictures of Joshua trees. It's been a fun project, and a fun way to explore new areas that I've never been before.
I love it. And we'll definitely provide a backlink to iNaturalist on our show notes. Now, for our listeners, as I'm chatting with Jim, the video's on. He's got a beautiful desert landscape behind him, but there's this obnoxious looking white pole. It's got a bunch of holes in it. And when I was at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, there was one of those obnoxious looking poles sitting right by the table where Jim and his wife were. So, Jim, what are those obnoxious looking poles?
Yeah, so these are mining claim markers. And so we all are familiar with the notion that if you can go out in the desert and find some gold and you can stake a claim, and the phrase to stake a claim comes from the notion of literally taking a stake and driving it in the ground and saying, "This is my spot and only I can have it." You can imagine, the historical pictures of Christopher Columbus landing on the shores of Florida and planting the flag of Spain in the ground. And that was his stake. And he claimed all of North America for the crown of Spain that way. So it goes back a long time, this notion of staking claim. But what happened in the desert, is prospectors started coming out here in the middle 1850s or so and staking claims. And, it's the desert. There's not a whole lot of stakes to use. So they started piling up rocks to mark the corners of their mining claims. And you can imagine that, finding a pile of rocks out in the desert, which functionally is a pile of rocks, was a problem. So over the years, what constituted a stake changed. And then in the 1970s, with the advent of plastics, the prospectors started using these hollow 4-inch diameter PVC pipes to mark the corners of the claim. And it was a great advance in technology for the prospectors. If you're trying to haul heavy things around the desert, you can only carry a few, but these white pipes are pretty light. And you can, strap 20 of them on your back and start walking up across the desert, marking your corners. And you can see them from a great distance. With binoculars, you can see them 3 and 4 miles away. So it was a great thing for them. So they started using them in about 1970. By about 1980, the biologists were realizing that these things were acting as traps for birds. So some of our cavity nesting birds, like woodpeckers or birds that would use a woodpecker hole, an old woodpecker hole, were dropping down inside these pipes to investigate them as a place to nest. And of course, the bird gets in the bottom and he can't open his wings to fly out, and they get trapped in the bottom of these pipes and die. So legislation was introduced, and by 1990, the feds prohibited the use of hollow pipes for marking claims. Nevada went one step farther, which is, you don't think of Nevada as a particularly environmentally friendly state, at least not in the old days, as, it was a mining state. But Nevada went one step further and told the prospectors that they could have 20 years to retrofit their claims. And if by that time they hadn't done so, that citizens could go out on the landscape and knock down the remaining pipes on the assumption that they're abandoned. So that started around 2010 or so. And so since that time, people in environmental organizations and the BLM, but Fish and Wildlife, have gone out and knocked down, several 100,000 of these pipes. But they figured that there's 1 million put up in Nevada. And so when you knock down a couple 100,000, that still leaves some hundreds of thousands of these pipes remaining in the desert that every year trap and kill more birds. So I find great pleasure in hiking with a purpose. And my purpose for hiking is not to go climb some peak and walk down and tell my friends and post it on Facebook that I made it. My purpose in hiking is to go out and knock down as many mining claim markers in a day as I can. And, when they first started knocking them down, they got the easy ones. And what's left now are the tough ones. And it can be a good day's work to knock down a dozen of these pipes. But, on that rare occasion when you knock one over and a live bird comes out and flies away, it's just really, really, you can hear the emotion in my voice. Just remembering these two events when it's happened to me. It's just really something. It really
Wow.
feels.
Now, when you knock the stakes down, do you just leave them there, or are you bringing them back? I mean, uh, I can see carrying one back on your back, but you know, perhaps they're that far away from each other.
It, it depends on the situation. The law says that we need to knock them down and leave them in place. And that's kind of a historical artifact of using surveyors to determine where to put these pipes. And the prospector said, well, if it takes me 20 years and one day to come back and retrofit my claim, I don't want to have to pay a surveyor twice to survey them out. So the legislation says that we need to lay them down in the place where we found them. So if somebody wants to come back and put up a wooden post or something, that they know just where to put it. But a lot of this work we do is in some of the new national monuments and wilderness areas and places like that, where it's not ever going to be legal to restake these claims. Places where mineral rights have been withdrawn. And so in those situations, we try to hold them out. But yeah, it's definitely a logistical problem. If you hike 5 miles and you pick up a post every 300 feet, that would be quite a load by the time you got back.
Definitely that. Well, and there has to be this wonderful sense of satisfaction knowing that and you've just shared it. You've seen a couple live birds fly out of these stakes, and you've saved their lives through the knocking down of the stake. It's got to feel wonderful that you are actually making a difference not only in the desert but for the life that is there.
Yeah. So back to this notion where something on the order of 50 or 70% of the birds are gone. Um, it makes sense to do what we can as individuals to stop that decline. Most of the birds that we catch here in southern Nevada are actually flycatchers. And flycatchers are really pretty birds with yellow bellies and red in the wings. And they catch flies. And, one thing we can always use is more creatures out there catching the flies to bug us.
Oh, heck yes. Heck yes.
So, and the other notion is that, these pipes are out there passively killing creatures. And if nobody takes them down, then they're going to be up that way forever, for a very long time. PVC does degrade in the sunlight over time, and that helps, but not a lot. But you can imagine that, if all of humans were suddenly disappeared today, that these pipes would be in the desert for another couple hundred years. So if we can go out and knock down any fraction of them, that's a lot of birds over a long time that are not going to die and save their lives.
Now, this exercise of going out and hiking, finding these stakes, I mean, it's a passion of yours, an interest, and there's that sense of accomplishment. If somebody finds your work on the website, birdandhike.com, where you talk about these pipes, when they reach out to you, what are they asking you about? Or are they just saying, how can I help? Here's money. How are they getting engaged in this process to help make that same kind of difference that you're making?
Yeah, occasionally people will write and ask questions about it, but it's mostly about sort of the mechanics, the legality. There's still people that don't believe it. I had a very unpleasant interaction with a deputy sheriff up in Nye County. And so now I carry on my phone a copy of the law so I can actually show it to them. There's a lot of people that just believe that can't possibly be true. And by God, he wasn't going to let me out there to knock down his granddaddy's mining claim markers. So, there's always questions about that sort of thing. And the thing I encourage people to do, though, is just to learn about the problem. And then, maybe on your own property, you've got pipes, even, abandoned water pipes or fence posts or things like this. There's a lot different kind of open pipes that trap and kill creatures. A number of places that have used 1-inch diameter PVC pipes because, oh, this is great. This is not going to kill the birds. Well, it turns out that the native bees go down inside those things and get trapped and die. And so, even smaller diameter pipes that are open in the desert are a problem. And, it's not that hard to cap them or save your soup cans and just drop the soup can over the top of your fence post. It's a real easy way to put a cap on it. A lot of things like that can be done. And then I encourage people, if you do find these pipes out, to send me a note for where you found them. Because if you found one then I could probably go over the hill and look a little farther and find some more. And the fact is that most of them are gone now from Clark County. The land management agencies, BLM in particular, has been very aggressive in working on these. And, the other agencies too, Fish and Wildlife and Dow. But, the BLM has a firefighting crew. And in the summer, when it's fire season, they have lots of firefighters. And in the winter, they keep a few around just because there might be a fire. And so the last couple of years, they've dedicated two of these guys, so pretty much full time all winter, to scour Clark County looking for these mining claim markers. It's been really good. But so now, we're going up in Lincoln and Nye and farther north where there's still lots of them. But the main problem is that the easy ones that you see from the highway are cleared out already. And so if people are out hiking and they see one somewhere, that's important information to know where to go look next.
Sure, sure. When you are out hiking, and whether it's for, enjoyment or for the purpose of, you've heard about a stake or stakes and you're going to go out and cut them down. All right, by the way, are you cutting them down? Are they so affected by the weather you can just kind of bend them over with a little push of the shoulder? How are you getting those things down?
Actually, they're usually just set in about 6 or 8 inches of dirt. So you just grab the top of it and pull it over.
Okay.
Is it most of them? You occasionally run into ones where it's not PVC; it's more of a rubberized pipe. And actually, some of those I do carry a handsaw and cut them down. Of course, then you cut them off at the stump of the base, and that leaves a hollow pipe going down to the ground 6 or 8 inches, where lizards and beetles and other things can fall in. So then you want to pick up some dirt and fill it up with dirt before you leave. But
Gotcha. Gotcha.
the vast majority of them, you just pull them over, lay them down. It's
Okay.
trivial.
When you're out hiking, what do you take with you to, know that, your safety, got the water, but over and above the hair, I mean, you still have a head of hair. I don't. So I definitely have to wear the hat. You probably still do as well. But besides a hat, plenty of water, what are you taking out on these hikes with you?
Yeah. So sun protection is always a big problem, unless of course freezing in the middle of winter. But I always wear long sleeve shirts and long sleeve pants for sun protection. I'll put sunscreen on the backs of my hands sometimes. It feels like a problem. But some of the main things I carry are a basic first aid kit. And my first aid kit starts with my shirt. If I need bandages, my shirt is my first main bandage. If I need to tie the bandages on, well, you get your pocket knife out and go after your shirt sleeve. So I'm not carrying a lot of extra stuff. I do carry some cloth tape. I carry enough stuff so that I could probably survive a night out by myself. So I always carry, even summer hiking because the nights get cold. I carry a beanie hat, a fleece hat, fingerless gloves. I carry a big garbage bag, which works as a poncho to cover over, and one of those metallic emergency blanket things. I always carry a couple of extra granola bars. There's a bag of food that just sits in the bottom of my pack. It's not part of my lunch. It's just, the emergency food supply. And I also carry a GPS, which I find invaluable, and I don't understand why more people don't use GPS technology. It's not that infrequent when I'm not knocking down these pipes, and you see one more that's just a little bit farther out, and it's late in the day, and then you get to that one, dang, there's one more, and it's a little bit farther out. And by the time you get to the last one, it's getting dark. And then it's like, well, where in the desert behind which hill is my truck? And with the GPS, it's trivial. You just, hit the button to go to, tell it to go to the truck, and it'll give you an arrow pointing towards the truck. You hear so many stories of people get out and it's dark and they walk back and they get to the road and they get to the road and they say, dang, is my truck to the left or is it to the right? And they start walking. And it turns out, they walk a couple miles in one direction and they don't find their car. So they turn around and they walk back a couple miles in the other direction to get back to where they started. And so many of these problems could be eliminated just with the GPS. And, with free GPS apps for every smartphone, there's no excuse to not use it.
You know,
I
we
also
were we were out at Badwater Basin on Saturday, and we probably walked out. I walked out maybe about a half a mile, maybe three quarters. My friends, they were maybe another quarter mile past that, half mile. And coming back, it was pitch black. And thank God my friend, she had her GPS, and we were definitely making our way back to the parking lot. But even with my headlamp on, it wasn't enough. And
Mhm.
so good, thank heavens for that.
Yeah. Another thing I carry that I would encourage people, at least people that hike alone like I do, is some kind of a personal locator beacon. So, if you really get in dire straits, you can push the button and the helicopters will come rescue you.
Sounds like a good plan to me. Sounds like a good plan, and thank you for sharing that. Jim, I'd like to spend a little time on the website, Bird and Hike. I mean, it's a fascinating website, and for our listeners, we're going to provide the backlinks because, and I will ask Jim again where listeners can learn more about him and his work. But let's talk about Bird and Hike. You've got quite a variety of resources and areas of discussion and ideas for people to visit. So, how did that website and its evolution come about for you?
Well, that's a long story too, with some details, so we'll need to skip.
Okay.
But I had a job once where I needed to look busy at a computer with nothing to do.
I've
So
had one of those.
kind of the genesis of that. And as long as you were doing something, your boss was happy. They didn't ask what you were doing. As long as when their boss came through, you looked busy, my boss was happy. But it started out, well, it's Bird and Hike. So it's a website for bird watchers and hikers around Las Vegas. It started out just bird watching. And so I started writing about some of the places where people, especially visiting birders, a lot of people come to Las Vegas for conventions. They want to do something else while they're here. Could do some birding, for example. So a resource for people like that to find quick and easy places and of course the best places to go look for birds around Las Vegas. And eventually it branched into hiking too. And then, so, all of the major hiking areas around Las Vegas are listed with lots of hikes in each one. And I give a lot of information. It's sort of a guidebook, an online guidebook. And I give a lot more information and a lot more pictures than a normal guidebook would, because I find that I get people who, maybe they were in Boy Scouts when they were kids and they liked it, but then they grew up and got jobs and life got busy with kids and stuff. But now they're thinking that, maybe they should get their kids out in the woods and stuff too. But, they haven't done it in a long time and they're kind of afraid. And, if they take the kids out, the coyotes are going to eat them and they're going to step on about 6 rattlesnakes. And, there's just always and the roads are too rocky. And, there's always some reason why you can't do it. So I try to put on so many pictures that people can feel like they're there. And when I'm with other people, I have other people in the pictures. So these folks can look at them and say, well, I know exactly what the trail looks like. I see other people doing it. And if those people can do it, then I could probably do it too. And if they have their kids and they bring their kids back safely and the dogs back safely, then, probably this person could do the same. And then, occasionally you get the email from someone that says essentially this, and, like they've got active back in hiking and camping with their kids and it changed their life and, on and on. And it's very rewarding.
I
So I
love it.
sort of grew up over a long time. Then, of course, when I'm out, I'm an ecologist, so I can't just say, you walk up the trail. It's like you walk up the trail and while you're out, you see these trees. Oh, what are these trees? And what about them? And, oh, at this elevation, you get these kind of trees and you get higher in the mountains and there's different kind of trees. And oh, by the way, there's different birds in the different elevations, the different trees, and there's links to all of these things. So if you read the trail and it says, you go into the bristlecone pine forest, there'll be a link there to information about bristlecone pines, and then, Clark's nutcrackers, and then links to that. And it just sort of goes on forever that way.
I love it. I love it. And I think the site is fascinating, and really I'm going to be looking forward to sharing that with our listeners. I've got two questions, or actually maybe two and a half questions. You've obviously spent a fair amount of your life out here in the desert, and you and your wife are your Las Vegas residents. Thinking back of your explorations, is there one place that really just it just brings back this whole flood of memories? Is like, God, I love this place. Is there one place that's special for you?
Well, yeah, it would have to be Joshua Tree National Park. I really cut my teeth out there as a young adult well, as a teenager, learning to be young and independent. And, it's where I started rock climbing. That's where I really started my interest in birds. That's where I met my lovely wife. So yeah, Joshua Tree is a special place for me.
Very nice. I was out at Joshua Tree last May for the first time. One of my first Outdoor Adventure Series episodes with a gentleman named Travis Puglisi. He owns and runs Wandering Mojave Hiking Services, and so Joshua Tree is his backyard. And I need to get back out there. It was a beautiful place. I also need to be a little better shape for some of that hiking, but that's going to be a winter activity, is to just get out more during the day and hike. So, but it's Joshua Tree is just gorgeous. So, um, before we head out, one thing we like to do with our guests is to ask them for an insight to go. And this insight to go could be a quote, an article, a book, just life lesson that you would like to share and leave with the listeners to our podcast. And so, Jim, what would be your insight to go?
Well, that's a tough one. Insight to go. Get out and learn about the desert and learn to appreciate the stark beauty and the relative safety of actually being out there, and do it by yourself. But you learn a little bit of self-reliance. Maybe you get a little bit nervous, and then you realize when you get back that you didn't need to be nervous. It's really a safe and beautiful, welcoming place. No, it's when I'm feeling frustrated with life, or things are annoying me, just a quick walk in the desert is such an amazing way to reset. And you can walk in flat places, you can walk on the sides of the mountains. It doesn't matter what's your style, but just, get out and go for a nice little walk, preferably by yourself, to really connect with the things that are around you, and get back to sound mental footing.
I love it. I love it. Now, I am curious though, when you and your wife go out, where do you go together?
We go lots of different places. No particular place. Yesterday we were out just south of Littlefield, a little bit east of Mesquite,
Sure.
doing a little botanizing out there together. It was just a wonderful day to be out together. The road was kind of ratty, but that made life a little exciting. But yeah, it was just a great, late summer day. Even if it was December, it felt like a summer day. It's so warm. Well, just to be out and to be together and look at some plants and find some fun stuff. It
Very
was great.
nice. Very nice. We appreciate you sharing that insight to go, and that little that secondary question of mine. Jim, we've already shared this, but I want to do it once again. If our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah. So birdandhike.com, all one word. The homepage is sort of a table of contents. It's got information about the birding and the hiking. It's got a link to information about the mining claim marker project, and a link to my backstory too.
Fantastic.
And for
Well,
that matter, an email link if they have questions.
very good. Very good. Well, we will definitely provide the backlinks to birdandhike.com And also for our listeners, there's articles that Jim has written, and they're available there as well. So really just a wonderful website. So do check it out. And I guarantee you, I am going to be the opportunistic podcaster and fellow Las Vegas resident because I want to go hang out with Jim. Even though he wants to do some hiking alone, I want to twist his arm maybe, at least once or twice here and there. Jim, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. I hope you enjoyed the experience. I certainly did. It was just wonderful to get to know more about you, your background, your work, and your passion. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me on. It's great to raise awareness about the mining claim mark, the problems, and some of these other things. I will be getting up some small groups in January to go down towards Searchlight and work on 1-inch diameter pipes. So there'll be some opportunities if people want to come out and see what it's all about.
Sounds like a plan. Well, you can count me in for that one. I will definitely want to take part with you in the group that you're going to be pulling together. Jim, hang on to the call for just a second. We're going to do a quick close and you and I can chat for a few more minutes, okay? All
Okay.
right, folks, we have just been chatting with Jim Boone. He's an outdoor enthusiast, an ecologist, really just a fascinating individual. Just to hear about his background, just, you don't often hear from someone who's kind of grew up in the desert. It's just like he's got one of the world's largest playgrounds that you could imagine, and especially his fondness and love for Joshua Tree. We were there last year. What a beautiful place. And really, you literally can walk out the door here in Las Vegas and, literally within about 20 minutes, there's some hiking trails, there's bird watching, outdoor adventure local, and you have Lake Mead, Red Rock, Mojave National Preserve, Death Valley, all within short distances away. So there's no shortage for getting out and exploring, learning about the environment, the wildlife, and also some of the more personal components that Jim shared, these mining stake claims, these markers, and the detriment that they have been causing for the birds and even the ones that perhaps have been cut down, but they're shorter and there's still insects and lizards that can get caught down in them. So really, just a wonderful passion of his and the people who care about it is to go out and find those markers and dismantle them, leave them right where they're at. So glad I ran into Jim at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, and grateful that he was open to spending some time on today's podcast, and really great information. And above all, go and check out the Bird and Hike website. We will provide the backlink. So if you have any thoughts about coming to Las Vegas, and maybe you're going to be at a show or a conference on the strip, but definitely plan to take some time and get out of town. And this is such a great resource for you to take advantage of and figure out where you might want to go exploring. Okay, folks, this has been the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. You can find us on outdooradventureseries.com. We are also on the major podcasting platforms, still under the umbrella of Success Insight Podcast, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, Audible, and especially Spotify, where we have the Outdoor Adventure Series playlist. Probably during the latter part of this year, early 2022, we're going to have all the podcast platforms set up for the Outdoor Adventure Series. But in any case, do let us know what you thought of today's episode. Send us an email, Howard Fox, foxcoaching.com. You can also comment, like this episode or any other episodes directly on the podcasting platforms or on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast page or on our Success Insight pages on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Enjoy the rest of 2021 and make it a point to go out and explore in the new year, okay? And you take care of yourselves, your family, and we will see you on a future episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Thank you so much.